Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. It began in the darkness of space. Far beyond the reach of any human exploration, an alien species known only as the Thrax was making its move. The Thrax were a monstrous race, their bodies towering with pale, sleek scales that shimmered like polished obsidian. Their eyes were black voids, reflecting no light, no warmth, and no compassion. They were a species designed by nature for one singular purpose: annihilation. For centuries, they had scoured the galaxy, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. No other species had been able to stop them, not the ancient and wise Lunians, nor the technologically advanced Zogarians. The Thrax were unstoppable. They could adapt to anything, outlast anything, and destroy everything. Until now, on Earth, humanity was still unaware of the threat approaching. Life on the planet continued as it always had, with its own struggles and triumphs, unaware that somewhere in the depths of space, the Thrax were preparing their assault. It wasn't until the first wave of destruction hit that the world would realize what was coming. The first signs were subtle. A minor fluctuation in the readings of deep space monitoring stations, an odd pattern in the radiation coming from the farthest reaches of the Milky Way. The military dismissed it as a glitch in the system. But then the reports began to trickle in from other stations. First one, then two, then more. Someone was crossing the void, leaving behind no trace of their passage. By the time the first human colony on Mars received a distress call, it was already too late. The Thrax had descended upon the red planet with a fury that none could have predicted. Colonists in isolated outposts were slaughtered without mercy. The atmosphere around Mars flickered and burned as massive ships tore through the sky, their weapons disintegrating entire settlements. It was only after Mars fell that the rest of humanity started to comprehend the scale of the threat. The UN immediately convened an emergency summit, drawing in military leaders, scientists, and strategists from all corners of the globe. What they discovered in the wake of the Martian tragedy sent a chill through their ranks. The Thrax weren't just attacking, they were hunting. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't need resources. Their entire purpose was to hunt down and exterminate any life they encountered. Even the Zogarians, the fiercest fighters humanity had ever seen, had been defeated by them in the past. For the first time in recorded history, humanity was facing a foe that was not only more powerful, but more ruthless than anything they could imagine. However, amid the chaos, one voice rose from the din of desperation, a voice that no one expected to hear. It was Dr. Erin Cade, a human exobiologist, whose theories on alien warfare had been laughed off by her peers for years. She had once proposed the unthinkable, that the Thrax were not simply an unstoppable force. They were a predictable one. Humans are the only species capable of stopping them, she declared at the emergency summit, her voice cutting through the panic and uncertainty. Her words hung in the air, too bold to ignore. The room fell silent as Dr. Cade continued. The Thrax hunt by instinct. They are predators that rely on brute force and cold calculation. But they do not understand adaptability. They cannot predict the human mind. The audience, initially skeptical, leaned in as Dr. Cade laid out her theory. The Thrax had destroyed civilizations not through superior technology, but through their complete inability to comprehend the resourcefulness and unpredictability of other species. It was a flaw born of arrogance, a flaw that would lead to their undoing. Humanity's greatest strength was its capacity to think beyond the obvious. It was their creativity, their willingness to outthink their enemies rather than overpower them, that could turn the tide. They weren't the strongest species in the galaxy, but they could become the most dangerous, if only they could realize their full potential. That's a big claim, General Marcus Tyrell, a seasoned war commander, interrupted, his voice skeptical but intrigued. What makes you think we can take them down? If they're as powerful as you say, we've already lost. Dr. Cade met his gaze with unwavering confidence. Because we are humans and they've never faced a species like us before. We fight with our minds, not just our bodies. We find ways to survive where others would perish. The general, like many others, was still hesitant, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Hope that something, anything, could stop the Thrax. The realization dawned on everyone present. The only way to beat the Thrax would be to outsmart them. To use humanity's unparalleled ingenuity to create a strategy that could exploit their flaws. The decision was made. Earth's military forces would be mobilized. But rather than launching a direct assault, humanity's plan would involve leveraging the one thing the Thrax could not understand: unpredictability. They would fight not with superior weapons or strength, but with tactics the Thrax could never anticipate. As the summit ended and plans began to take shape, a new sense of unity spread across the world. Humanity was no longer just reacting to the threat. They were preparing to take the fight to the Thrax, to show them that they had made a grave mistake in underestimating the human spirit. It would be the most difficult war humanity had ever faced. But for the first time, there was a flicker of hope. The Thrax may have been the most ruthless species in the galaxy, but they were about to learn just how dangerous humans could be. The air was thick with tension as the newly formed Human Defense Coalition, HDC, gathered for its first strategic briefing. The War Room, a sprawling high-tech facility hidden deep beneath the Earth's surface, buzzed with activity. Maps of the solar system were projected on every available surface, constantly updating with the movements of the Thrax fleet. The silent hum of computers was the only sound, save for the occasional murmur of hushed conversations. At the head of the room stood General Marcus Tyrell, the grizzled veteran who had once commanded troops in multiple theaters of war. He had seen countless enemies, but none like this. The Thrax were not just a military force. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. "We don't have much time," Tyrell said, his voice low but resolute. "We've already lost Mars. Earth is next if we don't act quickly." The room fell silent, everyone's eyes fixed on the general. He could feel the weight of their gazes, the desperation, the fear. But it was also the raw energy of a species on the verge of their greatest battle. Humanity had never faced a foe like this, but they were not going down without a fight. Dr. Erin Cade stood to his left, her sharp eyes scanning the holographic displays. She had quickly become the mastermind behind humanity's strategy, though her methods were unconventional. She had been mocked by her peers for years, but now, in the face of extinction, her theories were the cornerstone of Earth's counteroffensive. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Cade said, her voice carrying across the room. "Their fleet is enormous, but their key weakness is their overconfidence. They think they're invincible, that their power will overwhelm anything in their path. But they can't predict human ingenuity. That's where we have the advantage." Tyrell nodded, absorbing her words. "So we're going to trick them?" Cade smiled, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "Not trick them. Outthink them. We're going to create a diversion, a series of deceptive maneuvers designed to confuse and split their forces. We'll keep them off balance, forcing them to commit to targets that are distractions." "We need something bigger than a diversion," Tyrell said, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. "We need to hurt them. We need to cripple their fleet, their infrastructure." "We will," Cade replied, her eyes narrowing with a dangerous kind of certainty. "We'll use their overconfidence against them. They've never had to face a species that doesn't just fight, they adapt, they learn, and they improvise. They'll be too busy chasing ghosts to realize we're building something that will truly damage them." The room fell into a contemplative silence. Tyrell looked at the faces around him. Young officers, veteran strategists, and scientists. All of them deeply invested in a plan that had no guarantees of success. But they had no choice. "Then we move forward," Tyrell said, finally breaking the silence. "This will be a multi-pronged attack. Our fleets will divide, but our tactics will converge. We strike fast and hard, and we make them believe we're weaker than we are." Days later, the first wave of humanity's fleet, a conglomeration of military ships, research vessels, and civilian spacecraft, moved into the void of space. The Thrax had no idea what was coming. Their scouts, deadly and efficient, had swept through the solar system weeks earlier, obliterating any defense they came across. But the humans had one thing the Thrax did not: a history of survival. The fleet was positioned in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, a perfect vantage point to catch the Thrax off guard. The plan was simple but audacious. The human forces would create a fake defensive line, a series of decoy ships equipped with electronic countermeasures, plasma bursts, and small-scale drones. The Thrax would see the false signal, assume they were under attack, and respond with their usual tactics, brutal, overwhelming force. Meanwhile, hidden in the shadows of Jupiter's moons, the real human fleet was preparing to strike at the heart of the Thrax forces. A series of stealth ships, utilizing cutting-edge cloaking technology developed by Earth's best engineers, were poised to infiltrate the Thrax flagship, Vardak Prime. The goal: disable their central command, sow chaos, and cripple their coordination. But as the first decoys engaged, something unexpected happened. The Thrax did not fall for the trap. Instead, they adapted. Within hours, they had launched a series of countermeasures, advanced sensors that cut through the electronic jamming, targeting the decoys with precision that startled even the human commanders. "They're onto us," Cade muttered under her breath, her fingers flying across the console as she analyzed the incoming data. "They've adapted faster than we expected." "Then we improvise," Tyrell said sharply, his voice unwavering. "We don't stick to the plan, we become the plan." Under Tyrell's command, the human fleet shifted tactics. The decoy ships began feigning retreats, drawing the Thrax forces into a scattered formation. The real fleet, meanwhile, repositioned itself to exploit any weaknesses in the Thrax's new formation. As the Thrax became more aggressive in their pursuit of the decoys, the human ships moved in close, launching rapid-fire strikes against their rear defenses. It was working. Slowly but surely, the Thrax fleet was breaking apart. The human ingenuity, unpredictable, unrelenting, and unbending, was beginning to turn the tide. But just as humanity's forces began to gain momentum, the Thrax revealed their trump card. A new, massive ship, larger and more formidable than anything humanity had seen, emerged from the heart of their fleet. Its surface was blacker than night, and its weapons systems crackled with a terrifying energy. "This is it," Tyrell muttered, staring at the approaching behemoth. "They're bringing out their best. But we've got one advantage they don't." "And what's that?" Cade asked, her eyes sharp with anticipation. "The Thrax are predictable," Tyrell said with grim determination. "And we've learned more about them in the last few days than they'll ever learn about us." He turned to his fleet commanders, all of whom were now ready for the ultimate test. "Let's show them what it means to fight like humans." In the void of space, the battle raged on, but for the first time, humanity had a chance. Against all odds, they had done the unthinkable. They had made the Thrax doubt their own supremacy. And the Thrax? They were about to learn that there was more to war than strength. There was cunning, strategy, and above all, human resilience. The battle in the asteroid belt had shifted in humanity's favor, but it came at a steep price. The Thrax fleet was far more powerful than anyone had anticipated, and despite the success of the initial maneuvers, the human forces were losing ships faster than they could afford. Tyrell had predicted that this war would be brutal, but even he was beginning to feel the weight of their sacrifices. The battle with the Thrax flagship, Vardak Prime, had been nothing short of a nightmare. Humanity's stealth ships had breached the outer perimeter of the Thrax's defenses, disabling several smaller ships before being detected and annihilated. Despite this, the damage to the Thrax fleet was undeniable. Vardak Prime was no longer the unassailable titan it had been before the attack. But it wasn't enough. The humans were pushing the Thrax back, but each victory came at a cost that grew heavier with each passing hour. The situation on Earth was equally grim. The global communications network had been crippled in the first wave of attacks. Governments scrambled to retain control over their populations, while civilian unrest grew. People were frightened. They didn't know if their families would survive, or whether they would see another day. The fear was palpable, but so was something else. The unity forged by necessity. Nations had set aside their differences and were working together as one, channeling all resources into the war effort. At the heart of the human resistance was Dr. Erin Cade, who had quickly become the face of humanity's fight against the Thrax. Her theories had proven correct, and the tactics she had devised had thrown the Thrax into disarray. But now, as the war escalated, the pressure on her grew. The more victories they achieved, the more the Thrax adapted. The constant pressure of creating new strategies was beginning to take its toll. In the war room beneath the earth, Cade was hunched over a glowing console, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. Maps of the solar system were again projected, but this time they were dotted with red marks, human ships, lost or in critical condition. Each mark represented a cost, and each cost weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Aaron," Tyrell's voice cut through her thoughts. "You need to rest. We need you sharp." She didn't look up. "There's no time for rest, Marcus. The Thrax are adapting faster than we can predict. If we don't act now, we're going to lose everything." Tyrell sighed and walked over to her. "You've given everything you have, Aaron. We all have. But we can't win this if we burn ourselves out. We need to take a step back, reassess, and plan the next phase carefully." Her fingers hovered over the keys. She knew he was right, but her mind wouldn't let her stop. She couldn't afford to be wrong, not with the entire fate of humanity hanging in the balance. The Thrax had begun to reorganize themselves, and soon their fleets would be back in full force, hunting for any sign of weakness. "I'm not the one who needs rest," Cade muttered, almost to herself. "It's them." She stood abruptly and moved toward the nearest wall, where a holographic display showed the Thrax's movements. The huge fleet was now moving in a single, coordinated group, as if they had learned to anticipate the human tactics. This was the next stage of the war. The Thrax were no longer the chaotic, unpredictable force they once were. They were organizing themselves in a way that made humanity's next move all the more critical. "Let's get a meeting with the commanders," Cade said, her voice cold with determination. "We need to outsmart them again, before they figure out how to completely counter our tactics." 2 days later, the human fleet was ready to launch its most daring mission yet. The plan was simple, almost reckless, but it was the kind of move that could either cripple the Thrax once and for all or end in complete disaster. The plan involved a two-pronged assault. While the majority of the fleet would engage the Thrax in an aggressive frontal push, a small, specialized team, led by Tyrell himself, would infiltrate the heart of Thrax-controlled space. Their target: a mysterious structure deep within the Thrax's home system, a massive black citadel that had remained out of reach for decades. It was rumored to be the core of their empire, a place where the Thrax's true strength lay, perhaps even a source of their devastating technological power. "Are we really going to attack their homeworld?" Tyrell asked, his voice laced with skepticism as he studied the map of the Thrax system. "If this goes wrong, then we'll make sure it doesn't go wrong," Cade interjected. "The Thrax have underestimated us at every turn. Now we turn the tables. We take the fight to them, disrupt their heart. We might not have the power to destroy them outright, but we can shatter their cohesion, their unity. If we do this, it will break their resolve." Tyrell nodded, but there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. They were facing a creature that had no concept of surrender. Would the Thrax even feel the loss of a central command structure? Or would they simply adapt again, becoming even more dangerous? The mission was set in motion. The fleet deployed in the dead of night, slipping past the Thrax perimeter under the cover of darkness. The special team led by Tyrell, half soldiers, half engineers, was prepared to board one of the Thrax's derelict warships and take it into the heart of the citadel. Their goal was to infiltrate the citadel, plant a series of disruptor charges in its core, and cripple the system. As they approached the Thrax's home system, their stealth technology was pushed to the limits. The ship's cloaking field was barely holding up against the scans, and every passing moment seemed to bring them closer to discovery. They were running on a razor's edge, knowing that a single mistake would end with them dead or captured. Tyrell's voice came over the comms, his tone calm despite the growing danger. "Stay sharp, everyone. This is it. We're about to show the Thrax that humans don't just survive, we win." The human team moved swiftly through the Thrax citadel, their every step deliberate, as they planted the disruptor charges in strategic locations. Tyrell's heart pounded in his chest as he realized just how close they were to victory, or to their doom. The weight of it all hung heavily on his shoulders. They had one chance, and this time they wouldn't fail. Tyrell's team moved through the heart of the Thrax citadel like ghosts. The walls were an unnatural, glossy black, cold and foreboding, as if the very structure was alive. It felt like they were inside the belly of a monstrous beast, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The deeper they went, the more intense the sense of danger became. Every corner they turned, every shadow they passed, felt like it could be their last. The mission had begun with precision. Tyrell's Special Operations Unit, 17 men and women, each handpicked for their expertise in stealth, sabotage, and combat, had infiltrated the Thrax warship without detection. Now they were inside the Citadel's core, moving swiftly and silently. Their target, the heart of the Thrax's technology, a massive, pulsating node that controlled the energy and coordination of the entire fleet. "Charges set in position," whispered Lieutenant Harper, the team's demolitions expert, as she adjusted the final disruptor charge onto a metal column. Her fingers were trembling, but her face was hard as stone. "Ready for detonation on your mark, sir." Tyrell nodded but didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the vast chamber they were in. The interior of the Citadel was designed with an alien logic, its layout bizarre and asymmetrical, as though it had been designed for beings that did not share the same perception of space or time. A sense of vertigo tugged at him, but he pushed it aside. They had no time to dwell on such things. There were no second chances here. "We're too close," whispered Dr. Cade over the comms. She was in a command center back at the war room, overseeing the operation from a distance. "The Thrax are already aware that something's wrong. They'll know you're there any moment now." Tyrell's heart skipped a beat. The Thrax had a vast network of sensors embedded within their citadel. The fact that they hadn't been detected yet was a miracle, but he knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. Time was running out. "Get the charges ready," Tyrell said, his voice low and steady, despite the rising tension. "We'll plant them all and then head for the extraction point. We move fast or we don't move at all." The team moved quickly, each of them placing their final charges in critical locations throughout the Citadel. As they did, they felt the vibrations beneath their feet. Something was shifting. The Thrax were on to them. Lieutenant Harper turned to Tyrell, her voice tight with urgency. "Sir, we need to move. Now." "The Thrax are already closing in." A loud clang echoed from the distance, and suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps reverberated through the metallic hallways. Tyrell's eyes widened. The Thrax had activated their security systems, and they were coming straight for them. "Stay calm," Tyrell ordered, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. "We stick to the plan. Get to the extraction point." They began to move faster, their bodies tense, each footfall deliberate. They were halfway to their destination when the first Thrax soldier appeared at the end of the corridor. It was taller than any human, its smooth black scales reflecting the dim light of the Citadel. The creature moved with a predator's grace, its inky black eyes narrowing as it spotted the team. Without hesitation, Tyrell raised his gun, and with a burst of fire, the first Thrax soldier collapsed to the floor. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the narrow hallways, and within seconds, more Thrax soldiers were rushing in from every direction. "Fall back," Tyrell shouted, his voice sharp. "Get to the extraction point now." The team retreated, using the cover of their weapons and the shadows to stay one step ahead of the Thrax. It was clear that the Thrax were not going to make it easy. As the group rounded a corner, a sharp, high-pitched sound filled the air, followed by a blinding flash of light. "Flash grenade!" shouted Corporal Rodriguez, his hand instinctively covering his face. The world exploded into chaos. The Thrax had deployed sonic disorientators, and the human team was thrown off balance, their senses scrambling to recover from the blinding flash and deafening noise. They had only moments to regroup before the Thrax would be upon them. Tyrell gritted his teeth and activated his comms. "Aaron, we're compromised. We need backup now." Back at the command center, Dr. Cade's eyes widened as the feedback from Tyrell's team crackled through her console. The mission was falling apart. She could feel it in her gut. The Thrax had anticipated their every move, and their countermeasures were as advanced as they were brutal. I'm sending reinforcements, Cade said, her voice tight. We've got a fleet of drones ready to deploy. Just hold out as long as you can. But Tyrell wasn't so sure. Aaron, we don't have time. Get those reinforcements here now. The team continued their retreat, but it was clear they wouldn't make it to the extraction point in time. The Thrax were closing in too quickly, and their numbers were overwhelming. Tyrell's mind raced, trying to find a way out. He glanced back at his team. Fewer of them now after the initial skirmish, and his heart sank. They had done everything they could to sabotage the Citadel's heart. But if they didn't escape soon, all their efforts would be in vain. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the hallway, sending a shockwave of debris scattering in every direction. The blast knocked several members of the team to the ground, their limbs tangled in the wreckage. Tyrell's heart skipped a beat as he saw Lieutenant Harper lying motionless under a fallen beam. He reached for her, but before he could get to her side, a massive Thrax soldier appeared at the entrance of the corridor. "Move!" he screamed at the remaining members of the team. "Get to the exit. I'll hold them off." With no time to argue, the team pushed forward, running toward the nearest escape pod. Tyrell turned and fired, holding off the Thrax as long as he could. His weapons fired relentlessly, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Thrax were too many, and they were too strong. The countdown timer in his head was ticking away. 10 seconds. 9, 8. He glanced back one last time to see if his team had made it. They had, just in time. The escape pod fired up, and within moments, it was launching into space, carrying the survivors to safety. Tyrell's chest heaved as he turned back to face the Thrax. He was alone now. He had done his part. He had given everything to buy his team the time they needed. He glanced one last time at the glowing, alien structure of the Thrax Citadel before he activated his emergency beacon. As the explosion from the disruptor charges detonated, a deafening sound filled the void of space. The Thrax Citadel shook, and the heart of their empire began to crumble. Tyrell's heart pounded as the pod carrying his team sped away from the explosion. They had struck at the Thrax's core, and now they had to hope that their gamble would be enough to shift the balance of the war. The escape pod's thrusters screamed as it rocketed through space, propelled by the force of a desperate, life-saving maneuver. Inside, Tyrell's heart hammered against his chest, his pulse still thundering in his ears. His hands gripped the pod's controls, but his mind wasn't focused on the delicate navigation. Instead, he was replaying every second of the chaotic escape. Harper's limp form, the crash of debris, the heat of Thrax blaster fire. Every moment had felt like it would be his last. The reality of their survival was slowly settling in. There were only a handful of them left. Tyrell had always known there was a chance they wouldn't make it out, but now that it had actually happened, the weight of it was almost unbearable. He'd lost friends, comrades, people he trusted. And for what? A single blow struck against the Thrax Empire. Would it be enough? As the pod entered the atmosphere of a nearby moon, human territory now, Tyrell sent a quick signal to the HDC fleet, notifying them of their return. The response was immediate as expected. A rescue ship was en route. "Tyrell, this is Aaron," crackled through the comms, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "What's your status? Are you alive?" He cut in shortly, staring out of the small viewport. The stars streaked by, but the silence inside the pod was suffocating. "We're alive, Aaron, but we're down to a few. Harper didn't make it. Neither did Sergeant Park." The words stung like ice, but he forced them out. "No time for grief now." "Understood," Cade responded, her voice hardening. "You've done the impossible, Tyrell. I've got reports coming in that the Citadel's collapse has already thrown their fleets into disarray. The Thrax are reeling, but this is just the beginning. We have to capitalize on this moment." Tyrell nodded, even though Cade couldn't see him. "We need more time. If we push too fast, we'll be buried," Cade finished for him. "I know, but we've got one chance to strike while they're weakened. If we wait too long, they'll recover. We have to be relentless." The decision was already made. Humanity had struck at the Thrax's heart, and now, The fight would either spiral into an all-out war or be ended before the Thrax had time to rebuild. Hours later, Tyrell was back aboard the flagship Arcturus, his personal quarters empty but for the hollow buzz of his comms unit. The rest of the survivors, those who had returned with him, had been sent to the medical bay, some unconscious, others broken in more ways than one. The rest of the team had been transferred to a separate wing, quarantined and debriefed. Tyrell barely had time to process what had happened before Cade called an emergency meeting. The entire command staff was waiting for him when he arrived in the briefing room, and as soon as he stepped through the door, their gaze shifted toward him. Some weary, some anxious, some outright hopeful. General Marcus Tyrell moved to the head of the table and stood, his eyes scanning the room. "We've got their attention," Tyrell said. His voice was hoarse from the stress of the escape, but he tried to sound commanding, focused. "But we've lost ground too. If we don't keep the pressure on, we'll lose the advantage. I've seen the Thrax at their most aggressive," Colonel Sutton, one of the senior commanders, interjected. "If they're as smart as we think, they'll come back with everything they've got. We're playing a dangerous game." Tyrell nodded. "Agreed. But this war has always been about survival. The Thrax underestimated us. They think we're weak, that we're scattered. We've made them bleed, but the next step is crucial. We'll need to hit them again. This time hard," Dr. Cade added, stepping forward from the back of the room. "We've studied their fleet response patterns. They'll reorganize quickly, but they'll be disjointed. We need to launch a multi-front strike to pull them in multiple directions. If we show them we can keep up the pressure, we'll break their cohesion for good." Sutton shook his head, skepticism heavy in his voice. "And how do we know we won't be walking into a trap? Their command structure is falling apart, but we're still talking about an empire that spans the galaxy." Tyrell straightened. "We're betting that the Thrax don't know how to respond to unpredictability. They're a species of brute force, not nuance. And they won't anticipate us making the move now. It's time to push forward." The command staff went silent, digesting his words. Tyrell could feel the tension in the room rise. The risk of another failed assault was high, but the risk of inaction was even higher. "We'll divide the fleet," Tyrell continued, turning to the map that stretched across the table. "We hit their supply lines in the outer system, draw off their reinforcements. Then we send a smaller task force directly to their shipyards. If we can cripple their ability to rebuild, we'll force them to fight on our terms." "It's a tight window," Cade said, her voice quiet but sharp. "We can't afford to wait too long. The longer we delay, the stronger the Thrax will become as they recover from the disruption." Sutton cleared his throat. "If this goes wrong, we're going to lose more than just ships. We'll lose the momentum. We'll lose everything." Tyrell took a deep breath and looked around the room. "I know. But if we don't make this move now, we'll be back where we started, on the defensive. Let's not give them the chance." The fleet moved quickly, almost as if they were one entity. Humanity had tasted the Thrax's blood, and they weren't about to stop now. As the ships sailed into the cold void of space, Tyrell found himself alone in the command center of the Arcturus, standing by the viewport, gazing out at the distant stars. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Was this their only chance? Could they really win this war with so little? But he pushed the doubt aside. He had no other option. Neither did Earth. A soft chime broke his thoughts. It was Dr. Cade's voice, coming through the comms. "The fleet's ready. It's time." He took a final breath, his eyes fixed on the black expanse of space. In his chest, a new kind of determination burned, one that was rooted in more than just strategy, more than just survival. It was the relentless drive to do what others had believed impossible, to defy the odds and show the universe that humanity wasn't just a species to be conquered, it was a species capable of conquering. "Let's do this," Tyrell said to no one in particular. And with that, humanity's final push into Thrax space began. The darkness of space stretched infinitely in every direction as Tyrell's fleet sailed deeper into the heart of Thrax-controlled space. The quiet hum of the Arcturus engines was almost meditative, but beneath it, the air buzzed with a rising tension. Every ship in the fleet had a singular purpose, to press the advantage they had gained in the wake of the Thrax Citadel's collapse. Yet, even in their brief moments of respite, the sense of vulnerability never left them. The Thrax might have been reeling, but they were not a species known for staying down for long. Tyrell stood on the bridge, staring out at the formation of ships that made up the human fleet. They were moving in tight formation, but it was a fragile arrangement, one that could easily break under the slightest pressure. If the Thrax countered with force, if they adapted too quickly, they would be trapped. He clenched his fists at his side, trying to banish the growing unease. Tyrell, we're getting communications from the fleet on the outer rim. Lieutenant Marlowe, his communications officer, called from the console. They've intercepted a message from the Thrax. Tyrell turned, his brow furrowing. What's the message? Marlowe's fingers flew over the controls, pulling up a translation of the signal. It's a response to our strike on the Citadel. They're calling for reinforcements from the farthest reaches of their empire. This is bigger than we thought. They're pulling in everything they've got. Tyrell's stomach churned. Damn it. I knew they wouldn't stay down for long. Dr. Cade's voice crackled over the comms. We've been monitoring their fleet movements. They're gathering at the Thrax homeworld. It's a massive force, much larger than we anticipated. We need to act before they regroup, Tyrell said, his mind racing. If we give them time, we'll be facing a war of attrition. That's a battle we can't win. Cade hesitated, then responded, her tone sharp. We don't have the manpower to engage them head-on. We have to hit them where it hurts, destroy their infrastructure, cripple their war machine. The longer we drag this out, the more the Thrax will adapt. Tyrell's gaze locked onto the starfield beyond the bridge viewport. The Thrax had learned to adapt quickly, and each time they did, they became more lethal. The Citadel had been a blow, but it was a temporary setback. Now, they had to dismantle the entire Thrax war machine before it could recover fully. We'll strike their supply lines, Tyrell decided. Divide their fleet. If we can hit their production facilities, we'll cripple their ability to respond. That'll buy us the time we need. The fleet moved again, breaking off into smaller units, each assigned a specific target. Tyrell led the charge with the Arcturus and a small strike team, his orders clear. Destroy the Thrax's supply chains and disrupt their reinforcements. The risk was high, but it was the only way to keep the pressure on the Thrax while they were still vulnerable. As the fleet approached their first target, a massive Thrax cargo convoy moving through the outer asteroid belt, Tyrell's heart began to race again. He knew they had little time before the enemy realized the magnitude of their movements and adapted accordingly. Their window of opportunity was closing fast. Ready the fighters, Tyrell ordered. I want a clean hit. No survivors. The fighters, a mix of heavily armored interceptors and stealth bombers, launched from the fleet's hold with deadly precision. Tyrell watched as they cut through the dark expanse of space, heading straight for the Thrax convoy. The convoy's ships were vast, lumbering beasts, massive transports that were vital to the Thrax war effort. Without them, their reinforcements couldn't reach the front lines. Fighters are in position, Lieutenant Marlowe reported. They're moving in on the convoy now. Tyrell's grip tightened on the rail in front of him. He could see the bright trails of the human ships darting through the vastness of space, laser cannons flashing as they struck the massive transport ships with brutal efficiency. The Thrax convoy retaliated almost immediately, launching a barrage of defensive fire. But the humans had the element of surprise, and the Thrax didn't have the speed or agility to match the humans' swift assault. This is it, Tyrell muttered to himself as the explosions rocked the space around them. The convoy's cargo ships began to crumble under the barrage of human firepower. Tyrell's team had hit them hard, hitting their fuel supplies, weapons caches, and communications relays. Without these critical elements, the Thrax would be left scrambling to re-establish their command and supply lines. Direct hit on the lead transport, Marlowe announced. It's going down. They're losing their supply routes. Tyrell felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. The remaining Thrax warships, now alerted to the attack, began to converge on their position. The first wave was decimated, but more were coming, bigger, faster, and angrier. We've got incoming, Marlowe warned. Thrax reinforcements. At least 20 ships, all heavy cruisers. Tyrell clenched his jaw. He had anticipated the Thrax would retaliate, but not this quickly. He glanced at his tactical screen, noting that the bulk of the Thrax forces were still many light years away. If they could destroy the remaining supply lines and cripple their ability to bring in reinforcements, they might stand a chance. "Form up the fleet," Tyrell ordered, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We're holding them off until the next strike force arrives. We can't give them the chance to regroup." The Arcturus and the rest of the fleet took up defensive positions, their weapons locked on the approaching Thrax ships. Tyrell's mind raced as the Thrax fighters began closing in. They were faster, more agile, and far better coordinated than anything humanity had faced so far. Then came the second wave, the Thrax heavy cruisers, massive ships bristling with energy weapons that could tear through a battleship in seconds. Tyrell had no illusions about the firepower of these warships. He'd have to rely on the human fleet's superior tactics and speed to outmaneuver them. "Fire at will," Tyrell barked. The human fleet erupted in a symphony of blaster fire, energy cannons lighting up the void like stars exploding. The Thrax ships retaliated in kind, but the human ships were nimble, dodging the enemy's fire while keeping up a constant barrage of their own. The Arcturus was in the thick of the battle, its weapons firing relentlessly as it cut through the heart of the Thrax formation. But just as Tyrell felt the tide of battle tipping in humanity's favor, a sharp voice rang through his comms. "Sir, we've got a problem. Thrax reinforcements. Larger than expected. They're converging on our position." Tyrell's blood ran cold. The numbers didn't add up. How could the Thrax have recovered so quickly? "They must have been staging forces closer than we thought." Cade's voice came over the comms. "We need to get out of here. Their numbers will overwhelm us." Tyrell looked out the viewport, watching as more Thrax ships poured into the fray, their relentless assault putting the human fleet on the back foot. The reinforcements were arriving faster than anyone had predicted. "Abort the mission," Tyrell ordered. "Retreat to a safe distance. We'll live to fight another day." The human fleet disengaged as best as they could, retreating into the depths of space. The Thrax were relentless, but so was humanity. They had struck at the heart of the enemy and made them bleed. Now they would regroup, recover, and prepare for the final battle. Tyrell slumped into the command chair of the Arcturus, staring out at the expanse of stars. They were still alive, still fighting, but the Thrax weren't finished yet. The war was far from over. The hum of the Arcturus engines felt like an eternal thrum beneath Tyrell's feet as he stood before the massive viewport. The stars outside were a cold, indifferent sea, stretching infinitely into the unknown. He had grown accustomed to this coldness, this unyielding distance, but right now, it felt like the very thing threatening to swallow them whole. The battle had been fierce, but it hadn't been decisive. Humanity had struck, and the Thrax had bled. But now, they were regrouping, their reinforcements growing larger with every passing hour. The human fleet, battered but not broken, had retreated to the outskirts of Thrax space, nursing their wounds. But Tyrell knew this wasn't the end. The war wasn't won yet. A sharp chime broke his reverie. It was Dr. Cade's voice on the comms. "Tyrell, we need to talk." He turned, his jaw tightening. He hadn't expected it, but he knew it was coming. There was no time for doubt now. Humanity had burned through their early advantage, but the war was still at a critical juncture. The Thrax had a formidable war machine, one that could push humanity to the edge of extinction. If they didn't act soon, they'd be buried beneath a relentless wave of Thrax firepower. "I'm listening," he replied, his voice cold and distant. "We've been analyzing the data," Cade continued, her tone sharper than usual. "The Thrax are consolidating their forces around their homeworld, yes. But they've also been retreating their weaker fleets to secondary positions, leaving them vulnerable. We've got one shot left to cripple their ability to wage war, and it's a gamble." Tyrell's brow furrowed as he listened, already understanding where this was headed. "A gamble? Cade, I've already led my people into battle against impossible odds. What are we talking about here? A direct strike at the heart of Thrax military infrastructure. If we take out their command hub, the one deep within their homeworld, there's a chance we can decimate their communications, their strategic coordination. It's the nerve center of their entire military apparatus. Tyrell took a deep breath. He was already well aware of the risks. The Thrax homeworld was impenetrable, a bastion of military might. Their defenses were more sophisticated than anything humanity had ever encountered. A direct strike seemed nothing short of suicidal. But it was their only option. Are you suggesting we infiltrate their homeworld? With what forces? Tyrell asked, though he knew the answer. The fleet was already battered, stretched thin. Sending in more fighters would be a desperate maneuver. We don't need to infiltrate, Cade said, her voice steady now. We just need to get close enough to strike. We've got the prototype weapon, the one we've been developing in secret. It's ready for deployment. Tyrell's heart skipped a beat. The weapon they'd been developing was humanity's last-ditch effort. A destabilizing warhead capable of destroying energy shields, rendering even the heaviest Thrax defenses vulnerable. But it came with its own set of risks. The weapon was experimental and untested on such a scale. You want to fire that thing at their homeworld? Tyrell's voice was incredulous, though he knew he couldn't afford to dismiss the possibility. What's the chance it'll even work? It's the only chance we have, Cade said simply. And if we fail, there won't be anything left to fight for. This will either cripple the Thrax or force them to turn tail entirely. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe. Tyrell was silent for a long moment, the weight of their last chance pressing down on him like 1,000 tons. Every logical instinct screamed at him to abandon the plan, to regroup, to fight on their terms. But there was no time for second-guessing. The Thrax wouldn't give them that time. And if humanity didn't act now, they would be swept into oblivion. Prepare the weapon, Tyrell finally said, his voice heavy with resolve. We'll do it. The fleet was reassembled quickly, the remaining ships rallying around the Arcturus as they made their way toward the Thrax homeworld. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken fears. Every captain, every soldier, knew that they were about to embark on a mission from which few would return. Tyrell stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the holographic map before him. The Thrax homeworld loomed large, its defensive networks layered in seemingly impossible patterns. But Cade's intelligence had uncovered a flaw, a weakness in the outer defenses that humanity could exploit. The Arcturus and its fleet would take that opening, get close enough to deploy the weapon, and hope they weren't obliterated in the process. We're in position, Lieutenant Marlowe called, breaking Tyrell's thoughts. Enemy ships are closing in fast. They've detected us. Tyrell's fingers tightened around the console as the Thrax fleet began to react. Hundreds of ships were on the move. Battlecruisers, destroyers, and a new class of warships that Tyrell hadn't seen before. The Thrax had been ready for this, and their response was swift. We have no time for a drawn-out fight, Tyrell said, his voice low but resolute. Launch everything we've got. We're pushing through to the command hub. The battle erupted around them. Fighters launched from the human ships, cutting through the chaos of Thrax fire. Missiles streaked through space, while the human fleet maneuvered with precision, dodging energy blasts from the advancing Thrax ships. But the Thrax weren't going to let humanity get through that easily. Their fleet formation closed in, and the firepower coming from the Thrax lines was overwhelming. Brace for impact, Tyrell shouted as the Arcturus shook violently under enemy fire. We're not turning back. He could feel the ship groan beneath the strain, but the crew held firm, pushing forward with the same tenacity that had brought them this far. Tyrell's heart raced as they broke through the Thrax defenses, the energy shields flickering and weakening under the relentless assault. They were close now, close enough to deploy the weapon. Ready the warhead, Tyrell commanded. This is it. The moment felt like an eternity, as the final countdown began. Launching now, Cade's voice came through the comms. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. The warhead sped toward its target, the Thrax command center, the heart of their empire. And then, the explosion. A blinding light flooded the battlefield as the warhead hit its mark. The energy shields surrounding the Thrax command hub shattered, and the once impenetrable fortress began to collapse in on itself, unable to withstand the force of the detonation. The Thrax fleet immediately lost its coordination, their response fractured and chaotic. Tyrell's heart skipped a beat as he watched the aftermath unfold. The Thrax were disoriented, scrambling to regroup, and their central command had been obliterated. It was over. The Thrax were beaten. Tyrell's voice rang out, steady but triumphant. Victory is ours. The war was not over, but the Thrax had been dealt a crippling blow. Humanity had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through strength alone, but through innovation, unity, and sheer willpower. Tyrell knew that the scars of the war would remain, but for now, humanity had proven that they could stand tall in the face of the universe's greatest threats. As the Arcturus and the fleet began their retreat back to human-controlled space, Tyrell allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The battle was won, but the journey was far from over. The future would be built on this victory and humanity's indomitable spirit. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.